anticipating the impact that climate change will have on the planet. And we are gradually coming to terms with the connections between the first challenge and the second, between poverty, economic activity, and the environment. Our challenge is how to continue to grow so as to ensure our future prosperity and the prosperity of places like Africa and India and China without endangering our natural resource base and our quality of life. And I think two facts illustrate the immediacy of that dilemma. The United States, with 300 million people, constitutes 5% of the world's population. It is also the world's largest economy and produces 25% of its wealth. And it was until very recently the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So contrast that, if you will, with China, which has 1.3 billion people, or approximately 20% of the world's population. It produces just under 3% of the world's wealth. But it has just taken over as the #1 position as the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. This is hardly surprising because the new middle class in China has become a major purchaser of energy-consuming products such as air conditioners and cars and other such items. And I don't think you can dismiss that as a desire for unneeded goods, because it is the logical consequence of legitimate individual aspirations in a growing economy, new businesses, and of course an expanding service sector. China will increasingly need energy, efficient workplaces, and transportation, and all the basics that are required in a developing economy. And whether it is air conditioning or any other kind of essential office equipment, they tend to buy older, more inefficient models. They are in turn run by out-of-dated power stations that in turn burn a soft, polluting coal. So if you multiply that by 1.3 billion people with expanding energy needs, it becomes obvious that it's just not sustainable. So we all agree that a concerted international effort to develop and bring to market as quickly as possible the technologies that will enable China and every other developing country in the world to continue to lift their people out of poverty while limiting the damage to the environment. And yet, despite the fact that we have the same goals, some industrialized countries have emphasized different means to achieve those goals. And those differences in approach have inevitably resulted in different policies. And I think that was demonstrated at 2 international meetings on climate change in September. The UN meeting in New York and the major meeting of the senior representatives of the major economies in Washington. And while they all wanted to support and accelerate efforts towards our mutual objectives of reducing greenhouse emissions, there are, of course, differences on the best ways to accomplish that goal. And it's my hope that we will not be distracted by clinging to one approach or the other for too long, because we need to build on the dialogue between the world's industrialized and the developing countries as quickly as possible. So, how do we ensure that the goals of economic prosperity and environmental protection are harnessed together? And I would argue that the answer is fourfold. It includes research and development of technologies to produce low-carbon energy and to reduce emissions from fossil fuels, the encouragement of capital investment in those cleaner technologies, and of course free trade. And the fourth goal is an international agreement under the UN framework that reflects our shared objectives, but recognizes differences of culture and levels of development and economic needs. And that is why since 2001, the Bush administration has spent $37 billion on climate change, including over $17 billion on research into the development and deployment of clean energy technologies. And that's more than any other country in the world. But we need more investment a new international clean technology fund to help developing nations get their hands on clean technology as soon as possible. At the same time, we must eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers on less polluting goods and services if we are to ensure their widespread use around the world. And on the issue of environmental self-determination, the United States continues to believe every nation should design its own strategy for making progress, but within a UN climate change framework that would be part of the Convention on Climate Change. Limits and mandatory regulations that have little regard for different national circumstances are not practical. And the journey is less important than the ultimate destination. And in the meantime, the United States, for its part, will continue to work domestically on lowering consumption, cleaning its existing sources of energy, and measuring its emissions. And we will also continue our investment in alternative fuels, such as solar, hydrogen, biofuels, and work to safeguard forests both at home and abroad. The target is to break the link between increasing economic activity and increasing emissions. And in Europe, where you start from a lower base of greenhouse gas intensity than the United States, has managed to grow its economy faster than its emissions. And in the United States, with a booming economy, has managed to have only slightly rising emissions. So I'm hopeful that we're both beginning to break the cycle of increasing growth and increasing emissions. But that management process is not a once and forever proposition. To do so on year across countries, economies, and cultures requires action on a variety of fronts. There is no single solution, but rather many solutions, and they must be encouraged at every level and by every country. The third challenge is perhaps the most serious because it is not about policies or solutions to practical problems, but an attitude of mind. It is the rise of extremism. We must face the fact that there are people today in many countries who grew up with the benefits of democracy and freedom, but feel so isolated that they are willing to resort to terror. And to that end, even here, we visit all kinds of groups and listen to how they see things, and we try to understand them and help them see our perspective. And I'll be honest with you, they're not always easy conversations. But I do strongly believe that outreach to all communities is one of the most important parts of our job. And yet, for all the public diplomacy that we do, it pales in comparison to the vast network of connections the peoples of our two countries make directly with each other. More than 32,000 Americans, and I understand of the 32,000, about 1,000 of them are here, and 8,000 British students traveled across the Atlantic to study last year. And a massive 4.5 million UK citizens made the United States their destination of choice. Almost exactly the same number of Americans came to the UK. And the U.S. government